And joining us in studio is Dr. Anthony Townsend, a clinical psychologist. Marius Dutoy is a criminal lawyer. Sis Chogo Mpumlwana is deputy chairperson and the commissioner of the Commission for Gender Equality. Nosisa Gumede is senior social worker at ADAPT. And you at home, you're most welcome as our most important panelist. Give us a call 011-542-2186 or tweet at ANN7TV. Thanks so much for making the time. I mean, we live in a society where it's almost become second nature to expect that there will be some level of brutality or violence, primarily towards women. What does that say about the national psyche if we have gone to the point where we are desensitized, Sis Togo, or, it doesn't seem like we dealing with this problem adequately?
Actually, it's almost at a crisis level. The level of violence is emotional, it's psychological, it's physical, and it needs everyone in society to really work at it. And the most challenging part of it is that the people who are subjects or victims of violence are people who are not able to stand up enough for them to be heard when they scream and cry for help. That's why we don't have a very clear plan in South Africa on how to deal with gender-based violence.
Yeah, but Dr. Townsend, also the writing being on the wall, because it's easy to say you should get out of a situation that is already toxic and violent and potentially even fatal, but this happens often after the fact. So psychologically, I mean, there are family members and friends that can identify that this is something that is potentially potent or could lead to murder or that kind of thing, and yet we don't do enough.
Unfortunately, in many instances of gender-based violence, particularly among spouses, you often find that one partner will isolate the victim from much carried and helpful supports, meaning that they're not capable of recognizing those signs anymore. That isolation could be both physical or psychological, by sometimes turning them against their loved ones, which can become very, very difficult for the victim to endure, because effectively they can become helpless and blind to some of those telltale signs that can be so problematic.
Yeah, but the psychology of a person or man who kills his spouse, girlfriend or wife they're no simple. That's a very complex factors that come into it. One can't just say it's masculine possessiveness, for example. I mean, how do you even get into a mind of a murderer, as it were?
It's very difficult. I think that's, of course, the field of my colleague. But realistically speaking, when you deal with murder, we all know that we have murder that's perpetrated by women and men. So it's not something that you can necessarily say is only based in one specific gender. But that having been said, it's without a doubt the most murders are perpetrated by men. And whenever you have these situations, it's often born out from a toxic domestic relationship.
But the support that is there, though, I mean, we talk about halfway houses or safe houses and government intervention, Nosisa, but it has to come from a close-knit, safe environment where the partner will feel safe enough to have to talk about their reality. And we know we have this facade, the veneer of people not wanting to talk out.
And maybe it's only because culturally sometimes, when you come and he's hitting me or he's doing that, it's accepted. Men are like that. It's okay. At least he's not hitting you. If he's abusing you emotionally, at least he's feeding the kids. At least, we make excuses. We accept it. We normalize it to a point that if a woman thinks, is my family going to support me? She goes there and the family tells her, you need to talk about it. She goes to the police station and they're like, it's a domestic matter. Why don't you just talk about it as a family rather than opening a case when this woman is crying for help? You go to a place and they say, but there are no places of safety for you. Go back home and then you'll deal with this case tomorrow. Yeah. So especially with cases that happen at night, we have the challenge of nothing happens. You're told, come tomorrow. And the woman will die or anything could happen to her during the night. So it's quite.
Is it also because there isn't a collaborative approach to it, that institutions exist in silos, and if the police are not gathering the forensic evidence properly or efficiently, then it means that justice cannot prevail. So what kind of conversations should we be having, Sis Chogo, to ensure that the crime fits the punishment?
There was an effort to have a gender-based violence council, which is like the AIDS Council, where everybody comes together to say, what's the role of civil society organizations? What is the role of professional organizations? What's the role of government? What's the role of the of the security cluster? And unfortunately, it hasn't been successful. This problem needs everyone on board, because even education must play a part. To be able to assist children to talk about things they see happening at home, because a little child can tell a lot about what's happening. Then the educator will be able to see the signs of a troubled child early enough for it, so that the child doesn't grow up to assume that violence is normal in a society.
But just from a social understanding of issues and how you raise children in a clearly a violent society, and where perpetrators get away with murder, so to speak, because of, again, the lack of efficiency when it comes to the value chain in the security cluster. Marius, I mean, there'd be families, obviously, I don't even want to single out any particular, but that would feel that justice has not been served. And they have a constitutional right to also know why.
Absolutely, Sandy. You know, it's unfortunately a reality in our society that many instances these matters are just wiped off the table and not receiving the necessary attention they deserve. But those matters that do go to court and that are successfully prosecuted, we should really make a point of highlighting them, like you guys often do, because we have to make the perpetrators understand that crime does not pay. And similarly, you have to create an environment where victims feel that they've got the confidence to actually go and report something, and that there will be something done about it. But it's easier said than done in our society, unfortunately.
Yeah. Dr. Townsend, especially with the romance ideology that you sold in Hollywood and whatnot, do you think that at the time of a relationship breaking down, that there is a level of denialism and a sense of possession that if I can't have you, nobody else will? Or is there greed and all sorts of other things at play?
Well, as we've already kind of discussed, this is a phenomenon that's unique as forms of male violence, because it's not just about possessiveness. Usually it's a constellation of all of those things. But absolutely, romanticism plays a part in all of that. It's when one becomes so codependent on their partner that they feel they cannot tolerate the loss of them or in any other manner than through death. So very much so. It can be a case of, if I can't have you, no one can.
Yeah, but cognitively, though, I mean, what kind of, do you get stuck in a emotional rut because there's a particular desire or desired outcome, whether it's a battle over custody or estate, that person cannot think outside what they would rather have?
Very much the case. Often there's material gain to be had, or obviously a loss to be made if the relationship ended through any other circumstances, but very often there's an emotional dependency that's at play there, a certain level of controllability that one does not wish to lose in the loss of a romantic partner.
Yeah, but without going into the merits or demerits of the Henning case, where a young mother, 25 years old, had dropped off her son, I'm a mother of two, just because you're not expecting any harm or imminent danger. This is your daily routine, unsuspectingly so, and there is a plot that is orchestrated to take your life by potentially somebody who had loved you. Okay, without going into the merits or demerits thereof, what is the role of the police in ensuring that gathering evidence and forensics?
I think at the very basic level, we have to have investigation that makes that perpetrators are eventually convicted, tried, convicted, and sentenced. That's what we as a society demands. It's not something that we demand that is fanciful or remote from what we can achieve. It's something that we should expect in all matters. But unfortunately, it's far from the reality, and I think the Henning matter is a typical example of that. Remind yourself that, of course, the killers, the persons who perpetrate the crime, are serving life sentences. But the nexus between them and Henning, of course, could not be closed down by the state, and hence he wasn't prosecuted.
And is that justice denied, in your view, Sister?
Yes, indeed. It happens quite often that people, even families, hide these sort of crimes to save their children, to save their status in society. Just going back to the issue of why people don't leave, it's also a cultural thing, a social status thing, that I am married, I've got children, what will people say? And it's not just about me, it's also about my family wanting me to have this status of a married person, even when things are tough. And then you go to the police, they do the same thing, go and talk about it at home. And so justice gets denied to people, to victims. And then even when, if I may just extend it further to issues of rape, the system just is not prepared for people to be received in a decent way because of the extent, I guess, of the problems that we're facing in our society.
Yeah, we often also have selective amnesia. I mean, when we discuss these issues, it's because there's a high-profile case that is happening. It doesn't necessarily make news headlines all the time. That perhaps that's part of the problem. That it's not up in your face. It's something that happens behind closed doors. We put makeup and a Band-Aid over it, and life continues. So, in empowering women, because unless you're in that position, you will not know the level of despair or hopelessness or imminent fear as well. So, Nosisa, how do we get in those spaces that are not able to be policed, that are not easy to access?
I think now what we need to, how we work as an organization is, because we're based in Alex, which is one of the highest crime rates, we try to say, as women, can we empower each other? When a woman, when your neighbor, you can see something is happening, be the police, help her to get information, help her to give her the process on how we report. So we have so many community workshops trying to say to women, there is help out there. Because the idea for most people is, there isn't help. I've gone to the police, I haven't gotten help. I've done this, no one has managed to get me out. So it means I'm destined for this. So the idea when we empower them is give them as much information as you can. You know, not just about the high profile cases, but give them examples of what they see in the community, because they see it happening and they turn a blind eye. So we're saying, if you see your neighbor being beaten up, or if you see a child being raped, you also have the responsibility of, you know, don't look away. Do something as a community. Let's be each other's police before we even go to the subs or to anybody else.
Yeah, and Dr. Townsend, maybe you can, as I take a caller, look at the social psyche. What is it that makes people turn that blind eye and not want to engage with law enforcement? Dragon, hello. Thanks for holding. What's your contribution or question? Hi, Dragon.
Yes, hi, Cindy.
I thought that was probably a fictitious character. Dragon calling us from Johannesburg. We'll get back to that call. That what is it that makes people lose that compassion, that need, if somebody else is hurting, that you too cannot be comfortable and you're compelled by humankind just to do something about it?
It can be very difficult for us because while we can certainly empathize in those situations, on the one hand we're left in an awkward space because we always consider marriages to be so very private in many cases and we worry about intruding, which creates a certain level of intrusiveness or invasiveness that we wish to avoid. However, at the same time, we also worry about accepting responsibility around matters that we don't necessarily know the full story about, however risky they may seem, which is an unfortunate thing that can happen for us psychologically, but drawing on communalism becomes important in those cases, recognizing that rather check in than leave something unheard or unwitnessed in situations like that.
Yeah. Do we have a profile? Is there such a thing as a profile of a murder, especially if it's the highest betrayal, you know, perishing at the hands of a loved one? Is there a profile of that kind of a murderer, or is it something that you can't detect?
I don't think it's a question of having a profile. I think what happens often is you would have a person that perpetrated a crime, or let's say we're talking about a serial killer, then you would be able to profile the perpetrator by saying, listen, there's a pattern to what he did, so we expect this is a white male between this and this age. But generally speaking, it's quite difficult, and I agree with what he says. You know, it's very difficult, I think, at the end of the day, to just say, listen, because it's a relationship, it has now it will result in X, Y, Z. You can't necessarily say it will result in a murder. For argument's sake, there could be greed at play. There could be just a vindictiveness at play. I mean, we've seen the Flubber case, for argument's sake, which was just an argument which led to it. We saw the matter, the Oscar matter, which featured in the media. There's been several of these matters which are featured in the public domain where we've had a gender-based element of violence that was perpetrated.
Yeah.
And it had a different motivation. You know, when you look at the Panayoti matter, there was a different motivation. There was allegedly a lover involved and he had his wife killed. So in every instance, there's a different motivation as to why they actually do it. But I think if you look at all those factors, you'll get to form an identity of the person that's able to do it.
Yeah. Marius, hold that thought. Charles is in Pretoria. Hello to you, Charles.
Hello, how are you?
Hello, Charles.
Yeah, can you hear me?
either I'm hard of hearing or we have gremlins in the system. Hi, Charles.
Hello, how are you? Good evening, how are you?
Yeah, no, I think there's a technical problem there. Sister, all the drug and substance abuse that is also prevalent in society doesn't help in the gender-based violence. And for a country that is advanced in the peaceful transition and a constitution that is second to none, why is it that we're not able to clamp down on this?
You know, most of the cases that come to us as well, especially for the rape and the violence against children and older persons, have something to do with drugs and alcohol abuse. And in a few conversations as well that we had around some of the gender-based violence issues is also an issue of drugs and alcohol. But with elderly people, it's even more the younger men raping older women. And it's a problem in society, especially the new one, the Nyaupe, apparently really is a problem in in rural areas. And I don't think the state and the health department knows what to do. It's a huge problem. I don't think it has been declared an illegal drug, so they are still trying to find how to classify it. But young people are using it a lot. It affects their state of mind. They just behave like animals towards older persons. Who would have known in Africa we would not respect the elderly? It's the worst thing that can ever befall us.
Yeah, and I mean the level of brutality that we see even in the contact crimes is just something that is so animalistic and barbaric that you don't know how to make sense of it. So should the approach be more on victim support or preparing? You don't want to create an anxious society where people are permanently looking over their shoulder or engaging in relationships with distrust. But should we focus more on empowering young boys, girls, and women in general?
I think for us, this is an approach that we need to actually look at. Why just focus on the victim? Because the victim is not abusing themselves. What is happening to the perpetrator, to these kids who are raised in violent homes, who grow up to be perpetrators as well, to be violent as well, to these little boys who are raped and get to be at an age whereby they become rapists, they have that anger in them. And even in domestic violence cases, do we say when people like this woman comes and she's bruised and battered, and I cannot say to her, leave this man, because it's not up to me. And she says, I love him, I have these kids, my family would not support him, I need to go back to him. So we also need to say men and boys need to be part of the solution. We cannot just look at the victims. We need to work with everybody in this fight.
And we'll get contact details as well. But the thing is, why would one partner in a particular setting or an environment be abusive, and yet when he meets somebody different, that person has another demeanor about them?
Very much. I mean, we often find in these cases something progresses from an infatuation where it's supposed to turn into enduring love and doesn't necessarily take that form. Often, while there's an element of love, there's also a deeper desire for control in these situations, which is essentially affected both through psychological means and eventually through physical means. And often we find that pattern escalates and escalates and escalates until eventually it results in violence of the highest order, in taking a life from somebody else. Usually when they've initiated a new relationship, it often falls back into that infatuation because they're already meeting the need for control in another relationship, and a dangerous imbalance can be created in that sense. It makes a lot of sense to rather focus on preventative means rather than curative ones to try and stop these problems at their roots.
Yeah. So you must look out for the red flags. Is that what you're saying? That
Very much.
if he becomes aggressive because you spilled wine or whatever on the rug, it's time to move on.
Absolutely. Aggression should be very carefully monitored in any relationship. It should never be treated as something that should be acceptable under any circumstances, particularly by physical means. It should always be something that's understood, if not intervened with, can always carry the potential of escalating, and it's something that we need to take heed of sooner rather than later in such instances.
Yeah. How do we compare with the rest of the world? I mean, I think South Africa is top 5 in terms of the high levels of femicide in the world, including the US. So it's not something that is just a phenomenon in this country. But how do we compare in dealing, or maybe even reaching a tipping point to the rest of the world?
I think, realistically speaking, we have to remind ourselves of the fact that the past 20 years, I don't think our SAPS have become better. You know, if anything, the questions that are being raised about the efficiency in the prosecution, in presenting matters that are properly prosecuted by the MPA has left much to be desired. And I think for that reason, we know that the SAPS is understaffed in many instances. The equipment is outdated. And we need a concerted effort from all spheres of society to get involved in crime prevention. And that starts from the person reporting the crime to the person that is the first person that sees the victim when she reports it at the police station, to the prosecutor that deals with it. And I know they've done much. You have specialized courts dealing with kids and gender-based violence and so on. But despite that, there are still many matters that fall between the cracks. And we know there's a massive percentage of matters not even being reported on at all.
Yes.
Because people, there's just I'd rather keep quiet than actually go and report it because the perception is nothing will happen.
Okay, so in that case, if we talk about taking action, and on the one side we're saying, yes, there are deficiencies within the system. If you don't win in the criminal court, are there avenues to go with the civil route? And what would it take, Marius?
Well, absolutely, you can go the civil route, but I always give the following scenario. You know, if I walk in the street and a beggar comes and he stabs me 20 times with a knife, everybody would agree that I'm entitled to damages. But the difficulty is I have to sue a person that lives on the street. He's got nothing. And the difficulty that you have in many of these instances, you're talking about a perpetrator that just doesn't have the financial means. You talk about a person that, for argument's sake, is unemployed or a person that has no work. So how is he going to compensate you? Everybody would agree that you are most probably entitled to millions. But the reality is, how do you properly compensate such a victim for the crimes that were perpetrated against them? And we all know the moment there's a rape perpetrated by the police whilst the person was in custody, that's simple. Then you go against the Minister of Police. But when you deal with a perpetrator that just did it as a random act, and he has no means, at the end of the day, you as the victim sit with the result of his violence, meaning that you have to look after yourself. You have to go and get treatment. You have to go for psychiatric treatment. And in many instances, people don't have the finances for it.
Yeah, so let's look at Commission for Gender Equality and what kind of programs are there that people can at least tap into regarding their situation.
We do outreach programs. We go to educate people about access to justice, what they need to do, organizations they can partner with. We also monitor courts because there are instances where people come to us when they've given up on the system. You know, the bottleneck is just too much, and we assist them to unblock that through monitoring courts or going to the prosecutors to find out what happened to this case, and we accompany people through that. There's a case of a woman. Her case took 8 years for it to be heard, and she had been brutalized by her partner, and in a manner that is even difficult to describe, and left her for dead. And she threw her in a pit somewhere, and she lived to tell the story. But the case was in and out until we had to ask that it be removed from one court to another court, because sometimes those issues happen that I know so and so, let the case just be shifted and so on. Those things happen. So we do need to hold hands with civil society organizations, professionals, so that we can really highlight success stories, what you can do as a person.
Yeah, and also so just contact details we have to go where we can get hold of you.
011-440-4047. That's for our counseling rooms in Alexandra.
Yeah. At least there'll be somebody on the other line to take your call and sympathize as well. I appreciate you as always. That's Dr. Anthony Townsend, a clinical psychologist. Marius Tutoy, soos altyd broer baie dankie hoor. He's a criminal lawyer. Sis Chogo Mpumlwana is deputy chairperson and the commissioner of the Commission for Gender Equality. Nosisa Gomede is a senior social worker at ADAPT. And we do apologize for not being able to take all your calls, but we do appreciate the effort. We take a quick ad break. We'll see you shortly.